commissioner, author of a bill that I pulled because it was evident that more knowledge was needed, and we may provide that knowledge here at this meeting. But when a bill is pulled, it's gone until it's reintroduced. And unless I believe you all are satisfied with what could be reintroduced, I'm not putting it back. But I want to use this as a tool for educational purposes, not only for me, for the few that are here in the audience that have interest, and the exchange amongst you all, but also for those that are out in viewing land and Bay Times land, to get some answers to some questions that have been risen or have arisen. I've actually looked forward to this because I think it's going to be a very productive and useful gathering. We have 2 hours. If it takes that long, we'll do it. And just to go over, we have before us, and they'll introduce themselves in a few minutes, experienced and knowledgeable beekeepers. And we're gathered here hopefully to accomplish at least 2 of the goals, and that is to amplify the importance of bees and pollination in our agricultural society, which in this county is over 30% of the economic development activity. It's a very large portion of what we do. And also because the emphasis of this bill was directed at safety. But as Jim and I were talking earlier, some really common sense ideas that we may be able to impart might cure a lot of the questions that have been raised. So with this, I'd like to first thank Jay Falstad for organizing this and getting us directed into the right path. And possibly, Jay, you could introduce yourself, explain your interest in beekeeping, and then have each of our guests do so, and then we can proceed.
Well, thank you. Thank you also for pulling the bill, or having it pulled. My name's Jay Falstad. I work for Queen Anne's Conservation Association, but I'm also a beekeeper, and we have a lavender farm in the north part of the county. And we rely on bees for a lot of the products that we sell. We incorporate beeswax into some of our lavender products. We harvest the honey for sale and that sort of thing. And so this bill was important for us. When you and I first talked and when you pulled the bill, there were a few people that came to mind right away. And so the group that you have here, they'll introduce themselves for sure. But I first called Mike Embry, who really taught me a lot about beekeeping early on. We've got entomologists, scientists, farmers, hobby beekeepers. It's a great group. Everybody comes to the table really well regarded, and it's great. So I couldn't be happier. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for doing this.
It makes sense. Something simple like putting a bee ordinance in for safety has generated a lot of buzz, if I can use that, and frankly gives us this opportunity, frankly, to actually get facts, and that's what I'm looking for, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say after the introductions.
Go on ahead.
I'm Allison Howard. I have an organic vegetable and grain farm in the northern end of the county, and we rely heavily on bees for pollination. We use about 1 hive per every 2 acres. We grow about 60 acres of vegetables, so we have about 30 hives. And David Taylor is our beekeeper. He lives in Sudlersville, and he actually, I didn't even think of him, but he would have been a great asset to the meeting, and we would have been here until midnight.
Okay.
But
a mixed blessing.
Yeah. So he helps us a lot with our pollination, and bees are, pollination is essential to vegetable production.
Tom?
I'm Tom Walsh. I'm a hobby beekeeper, and I'm also a physician in practice in this county. So I can understand some of the concerns that you brought up in the beginning about safety and public health safety and whatnot. But as a hobby beekeeper, I've learned, the importance of bees, and I've learned the fun of beekeeping, and I've had a little bit of honey produced. And so I'm hoping I can contribute to this group by talking a little bit about the public health safety and issues regarding bees in the community, and a little bit about what it's like to be a hobby beekeeper, and please don't take that away from me.
I'm Marty Erst, live up in Churchill and been a hobby beekeeper for about 50 years now. We have a small holding farm with about 40 fruit trees, excuse me. And I rely on the bees to pollinate those trees. Been good up to now, and without the bees, I'm sure the produce wouldn't come in. And actually, as an aside, on a safety thing, I was one of the guinea pigs about 35 years ago at Good Sam Hospital for desensitizing people who are allergic to honeybees. That was me. I was one of them who was extremely allergic. And it can be done. My son also became allergic. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, my son also came down. One of the joys of having bees and beekeeping equipment around, and he also was desensitized with the same procedure. It takes about 2.5 years of gradual shots. I'm done.
You're done, okay. I'm Michael Embry. I work for the University of Maryland at the Y Research and Education Center. I've been teaching beekeeping in Queen Anne's County for 30 years now. Most of the beekeepers out, even in this room, I've taught at one level or another.
Yeah, me too.
And I also pollinate Schillinger Farms here on Route 301. So I'm active in making sure that enough produce is produced in this county to provide for farmers markets all over.
All right. I'm Molly Garrett. I'm with University of Maryland Extension as well here in Queen Anne's County. And while I personally do not have any experience in beekeeping, I know my master gardeners are very passionate about it, and it's integral to our teaching, whether it's even in the Baywise program teaching about natives or the Grow It Eat It, which is pollinating for the vegetables to continue to grow. And David Taylor is one of our master gardeners. He's always a hit at the county fair that we have every year. He brings his bees, and the kids absolutely love coming up to it. So I know it's a huge part for our master gardeners as well as farmers that come to the Extension office for research and need space. So I'm here as representative of the Extension.
Bill?
My name is Bill Anderson. I am also a hobby beekeeper, thanks to Mike Embry. I'm still learning how to keep bees. I'm vice president of the Y River Beekeepers Association, which draws its members from Queen Anne's, Caroline, Talbot counties, and neighboring counties in Delaware. We're representing about 100 different beekeepers, from professional commercial beekeepers to hobby beekeepers like myself.
Very good. Just to give a status report on officially where this ordinance rests right now, and what the commission did. One of the commissioners was absent. 4 elected to authorize it to be sent to the Planning Commission. No action was taken on it, nor could any action have been taken on it until a long process of hearings and so forth would have taken place at the Planning Commission. That's because it had to do with land use. With the comments that came from some members of this group and other interested parties, I pulled it out of that because it really wasn't fair to have a bill that may have technically been improper in the first place to go down there and create some log jam. I'd much rather hear it for myself here and get some kind of consensus of what health measures can be taken, if any. I'd like to see what people can live with, and if nothing can be lived with, I will not introduce the bill again. But I think it's worthwhile to have this discussion, one, because of the importance of beekeeping and what it does for the food chain, and 2, because of what Marty's talked about and what Dr. Walsh have talked about. There are avenues for sensitivity to bee venom. I know my auto mechanic went through the same process, and it's a number of progressively more potent venom, and the body gets a tolerance to it. And so, you know, we can talk about that. And then there are other things that are very common sense oriented. Mike introduced me to the common sense beekeeping safety. We were talking about this, and we can get into that as we, you know, move in to the actual things that promoted this activity. One of the other reasons, and as you dig, I'm also involved in the animal control ordinance. And, you know, going through that ordinance, I also saw that under nuisance animals, they list a whole bunch of behaviors and so forth, specifically excluded already under law are beekeeping and bees for honey. So now we have an anomaly of one bill contradicting the other. So I think the chances of this coming back in any way, shape, or form like it is pretty low. And I wanted to make everyone know that there is actually a law in the books now that prevents bees and bee colonies and so forth being designated as a nuisance and dealt with accordingly. So that was something, you know, as you root around and try to find, you know, as many facts as possible. Bees are protected in this county against nuisance designation, which means extermination and so forth. So, and that, by the way, for the record, the Animal Control Ordinance 9-19, Section B6. So, maybe we ought to just go around the table, and if anybody has any relevant information about the importance that you want to convey to the public that may be watching the YouTube of bees. We heard pollination. We heard, you know, the source of food. There's also, Mike and I talked briefly about a disease that's sort of, you know, taking out a lot of the hives. It might be useful to talk about that and what people can do that are beekeepers to watch out for. Whatever you guys want to talk about on the importance of bees, the floor is now open.
I'm not an expert, but I would like to just call everyone's attention or invite everyone's attention to an article in the current issue of National Geographic, coincidentally arrived in our mailbox yesterday or the day before. And there is a great article on bees, beekeeping, and the efforts to develop a pest-tolerant super bee. There's a great diagram included within this article that shows the importance of bee pollination to agriculture in the, not just in this state, but in the excuse me, in the United States. It indicates that the crop value of crops dependent upon bees for pollination exceeds something like $5 billion in the U.S. It's a significant component, as Commissioner Anderson, you pointed out earlier, of the Queen Anne's County economy here. This diagram in National Geographic, a little hard to see, I'm afraid, but it shows the patterns of commercial beekeepers transporting bees around the United States to pollinate the various crops, and the types of crops that are dependent upon pollination for production, either for the foodstuffs directly or in order necessary pollination in order to have fertile seeds so that the farmers can replant. For example, onions. Who would think that onions require pollination, but to have reproducing onions, you've got to have the plant pollinated. Maryland is shown with stippling, which indicates that more than 50% of the hives, beehives in Maryland are lost on an annual basis. And that relates to sort of, I think of it as the 4 Ps, pests, pathogens, pavement, which is to say loss of habitat, and pesticides or pollution that threaten the bees and cause the loss of colonies. I spoke with, on Wednesday night of last week, I spoke with one of the commercial beekeepers over in Delaware who said that he lost about 90% of his hives over the season. He went from 70, 80 hives down to 7 or 8 hives, he
And
said.
the reason for that loss was?
Well, the reason for that loss is these 4 Ps, as I mentioned, and then exacerbated by the extreme winter we had, the extreme cold and the severe winter. So I just wanted to, I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, but I wanted to invite your attention to this article in National Geographic, just coincidentally, very timely to come out.
We were talking earlier about a lot of vegetable material and flower material grown in hothouses. And I was amazed to find out that the bee of choice is a bumblebee to work inside a hothouse, because they work longer and harder and are reasonably indiscriminate about what they land on to pollinate, which is a fascinating thing. And surprisingly enough, those big old bumblebees are relatively benign when it comes to aggression. They're far less defensive unless you're digging around inside the ground where their hive is located. They only have about 50 to 100 members in there anyway. More?
Well, honeybees are also not aggressive, Commissioner. Honeybees, I can stand within 2 feet, closer to my hive than I am to you, probably just the other side of this table.
Can you stand there in front of the hive?
No.
And cast a
To
shadow on it?
the side of the hive, but I can stand there and
This
watch
is
them.
common sense. You don't stand in front of the hive, you stand behind it or by the side of it.
And where there are hives and children, what are the chances of them
Parents need
understanding?
to instruct.
Well, obviously, yeah.
But seriously, the honeybees, I think honeybees get a bad rap for, wasps are aggressive, some wasps are especially aggressive. Hornets are terribly aggressive. We've seen an infestation at my house of European hornets that are, or instead of being the bald-faced hornet like black and white, they are orange and brown or yellow and brown. And those guys are quite aggressive.
What about these very large Japanese hornets that actually attack beehives? One of my fears has been one of these things is liable to come on a ship and fly off in here, because I saw a hornet that was that big in my yard carrying a full-grown cicada.
Well, those are cicada killers.
Okay.
They
Not
are-
a hornet.
They're native.
All right, okay.
So a little bit, and just so we have some focus, we have a tremendous amount of professional and experience, and I'm sure we could talk for a long time. To get some focus, there originally, at first, the bill was pulled, but then in your note, in your talking, you alluded to the fact that if we could agree on something, that there's a chance that the bill would come back.
If there is something that, on a safety angle, that we could do, that would be possible, but then you still have a conflict with the animal control ordinance, which prevents consideration of honeybees as a nuisance, which would be what would be described in this bill. So, I don't think it's coming back. What I'm hopeful that we can do here is we can convey to the public that watches the common sense issues. Don't stand in front of a hive if your neighbor has one. Don't run the lawnmower next to the hive if you have a pool and water splashes on there. Advise the hive owner to put, and I'll let Mike do that because he's far more intelligent about it. There's a way of putting in a bird bath with gravel inside, so the bees can sit on the gravel, not drown, and because they need water to survive as well. There are things that we can convey to the public to do. If somebody sees a swarm hanging from their soffit, don't call a pest control company, call a beekeeper.
Oh, a beekeeper.
That's gold.
Or call the extension office. I mean, I think the extension
Yeah, we've
office
had a
keeps a
couple-
list of beekeepers.
These are the kinds of things we need to be talking about.
Most often, an extermination company will call us anyway because they're not allowed to take and kill that swarm.
Well, according to the animal control ordinance in this county, they probably can't.
Right, right.
It's good.
The Wye River Beekeepers Association has a website. It is also intended to be a resource, and we will have a list on the website of members of the WRBA who hold themselves out or happy to come and remove swarms.
Super.
There'll be,
You
contact
wanna-
information will be on the website.
Yeah, could you want to give us the website, for the record, so people that are listening in and watching can call?
It is wyriverbeekeeper.org.
Well, it's simple enough. And anybody else that wants to provide something,
Well, all beekeepers have to register their bees for the state, for the Maryland Department of Agriculture.
I see.
And through that registration form, there's a questionnaire on the back that wants to know whether you are willing to collect swarms, whether you are willing to collect bees from out of buildings, because they get in the walls of buildings, or if you were willing to go out and take care of yellow jackets. And you just check off, as a beekeeper, you check off which one of these things you want to do. And that is then given to the extension office. It's also provided through the fire department as an emergency, the 911 program.
Mike, this might be a good time, as long as this is a public information kind of thing that maybe people will be watching. It might be a good time to talk about swarms and how unscary they really are. I mean, bee swarms are one of the only times that I would probably go near bees without wearing a bee suit. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really believe it till I actually had a swarm at my house, and we captured the swarm again. But
how did you do that?
Not
that we want anybody that doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, but
to get a paper bag and try to.
Yeah, well, that'll work.
I probably will if you know what you're doing.
I mean, but basically, and Mike, you can probably do much better at this than I can, but basically, when the bees are swarming, they're basically just moving to another location because their hive is overcrowded. And that group of bees is leaving is a pretty harmless group of bees because they're all overfed and they're not interested in stinging. And you can go into it some more, Mike, but basically what I did when I captured my swarm is, and it was the first time, it was an amazing thing to watch, but I just climbed up on the stepladder, and it was like a, I don't know what kind of tree it was, just like a, well, anyway, some bush in my yard. And I climbed up on it, got a piece of bypass pruners and clipped the thing off and
Carried it.
and walked down the ladder again, and I handed it to my father. You remember my dad. Mm-hmm. I handed it to him. We took a whole bunch of cool pictures, and then we put the swarm in a place where we could save it. So the bees had no interest in doing anything to me at that time. So when you talk about, in the general public, when we talk about swarms, it's kind of a scary thing. I mean, it seems like a science fiction movie, you know?
Are these the times of year where you see these fellows that have these big bee
Yes,
beards?
it's the same
and so
sort of
forth?
thing.
Well, that's a trick, because
Wow.
what we do is we attach a queen to your neck, and then the bees will cluster on you.
But one of the things that Mike taught me when he taught me my class, and I didn't believe him until I actually got involved in it, and you, Mike, you said to me, you know, during this swarm episode, if I wanted, I could put the queen in my
Shirt pocket.
shirt pocket and walk down the street.
The queen doesn't sting.
Well, she's
Well,
not
she
gonna
would,
sting. If she stings, she dies.
Well, I thought the queen could sting multiple times.
She's not.
She's in the
No,
same
once
boat
her
as the
ovaries
rest.
have developed,
It's
then-
barbed
then-
at the end.
No, queens have smooth stingers, but because her ovaries develop, she's not able to sting, and if she does, it's the death to her.
So, but my point is, when we talk about swarms, it's a scary thing, and
Yeah, well, it's a little overwhelming when you see this huge cloud of bees come into your yard and all of a sudden cluster on a tree branch. Or I remember one time in Dorchester County, I collected one off a swing set, But, all I did there was I had a cardboard box and I dumped it into the cardboard box, closed the box up and put it in my truck and drove away.
Then you just opened it up next to an empty hive and.
No, I just poured them in.
Oh, right. It's amazing.
Each year, I probably, I don't maintain my hives like some beekeepers, and I actually encourage swarming, because from my perspective, if I miss a swarm and if it goes off into the woods, then it creates a feral colony, and that's not so bad. But just as a routine, I probably capture, I'd say, a half a dozen swarms a year, and I always like catching a swarm because it basically means a new colony for me.
it's free bees.
And my friends know about it, and so I'll get calls from others that say, hey, I've got a bee swarm in my yard, and when it happens, I always have a smile on my face, so it's good to have.
But it's amazing.
It looks a little scary because it looks like a pineapple hanging from a tree branch, and, you know, if you don't know what it is, you'd think, oh my God, these bees are going to come after me, but they're not interested in you. You know, can I bring up another thing?
Yes, of course.
It has to do with your neighbors and education and all that. When I first got my beehives, I had this dilemma. Should I just set up these beehives in my backyard and hope that none of my neighbors ever see the beehives? Or should I make sure all my neighbors know I have beehives? And you know, I got the beehives set up and felt guilty for a week or so. And then I went and made sure all my neighbors knew that I had beehives there in case, you know, one of the kids was allergic or something. Or they were coming, like you know, I had talked about, they come running through the hedge looking for their lacrosse ball or whatever. And it was amazing how receptive people were. And they said, oh, that's really cool. Can we come see them? You know, and my neighbors on one side have a bunch of little kids, and the father actually brought the kids over. You know, they stood back pretty far, but and watched me tend the beehive one day, but you know, they were 20 or 30 feet away. And I think a responsible beekeeper would probably want to let their neighbors know that there's bees there, and in case they want to take any kind of precaution.
It's amazing, and you didn't have to bribe them by giving them a quart of honey or something.
Well, everybody says that to you, so when am I going to get honey? But you hope they forget, but sometime.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
But anyway, yeah, so I think that's a responsible thing to do, and, you know, especially people with swimming pools and stuff.
This gets back to what Mike said, and that is responsible parents educating, don't stand in front, don't do this, be careful, don't disturb. You know, this is how we learn. There's the easy way and then there's the hard way.
And then also, the flip side of that, though, is we have to be better beekeepers, better
Okay.
neighborly beekeepers. And like Tom says, he went around to his neighbors and talked to them. I always like to take a little jar of honey along as a bribe, but, once you do that, they're usually pretty relaxed about you having the bees in your yard or in your neighborhood. But, there's always one that can make an issue for everybody else. But you try to convince, do a little education thing. In the first class I have in January for the beekeeping course is basically on how to be a bee neighbor, good bee management practices as a neighbor.
Is that course available for people to?
Oh, yeah. And I have a handout, and I'm going to give it to you. It's from the Mid-Atlantic Apiculture Research Extension Consortium, which is the five-state area around here. And it's an article on keeping bees in populated areas, tips for suburban beekeepers.
Right.
So that I'm going to hand to you, and for reference material. I've been using this book for the last 15 years as my educational material for the class. And in here, there's a whole chapter on being a better beekeeper.
It says beekeeping for dummies, then it.
No. But I'm giving you this also as reference
that's wonderful.
material. It's the book we've been using, and it has a whole chapter on how to take care of bees and your neighbors.
There was some mention of the process that people can take if they are discovered to be sensitive. My wife's a educated Bachelor of Science RN, and that's where I got my initial knowledge about anaphylactic shock and bee stings and so forth. It's typically not the first one or two bees, it's a subsequent one or a large situation. But there are treatments.
EpiPens.
Yeah, I was very, very allergic to poison ivy and took pills, which were basically gradually increasing amounts of the sap or whatever.
Yeah.
The one I didn't itch inside or something, but and I'm not receptive to that anymore. Right. So this is something that is available.
Well, generally, if you think about anaphylactic shock and the bee deaths, in the last year, the records were printed was there was 54 people in the entire United States that were killed from bee stings. That basically is one per state.
And Mike, that's not honeybees, that's all bees.
Yeah, that's all
stinging
bees.
insects.
And,
Yeah.
and if you put it in relationship, how many people die from car wrecks in the same year?
Oh.
How many people die from lightning strikes in the same year? It's twice as
White-tailed
many
deer.
die from electricity from lightning strikes as it is from bees.
Interesting.
You know, and that's, I spent a little time, because I knew we were going to be getting together, about looking at statistics.
Right.
And that's the exact same statistic I came up with. I think somebody said 54, 57. But your lifetime risk of dying from a venomous insect bite, and that includes all venomous insect bites, is 1 in 64,000. That's not a season risk or a year risk, that's a lifetime risk.
Lifetime.
And that's compared to your lifetime risk of dying in a car accident is 1 in 105.
I think I read somewhere the most dangerous animal from the standpoint of human damage is the white-tailed deer.
Yeah, exactly, it's probably that, part of that 105, you know? And,
My wife would say that's, she's hit 3 of them on Route 8.
so it's
so-
just, it's phenomenal,
And I think
little
one of the
risky.
things that has to be cleared up on the medical point is there is the anaphylactic shock issue, which is rare. I'm not going to, but then there's the heightened sensitivity. Some people, they get stung and they get a topical reaction.
Yeah,
And
histamine.
that's totally different from the anaphylactic. And they usually get the swelling or the painful joint. And it lasts for a day, maybe 2, and then it as the body recovers from it, it goes back to normal. That is an entirely different situation than a person who has anaphylactic.
Isn't that when, when the sting occurs, oftentimes we say, oh, I got to get this out, and they squeeze the sac, which comes
Well,
out, and then envenomate themselves some more.
Right.
But the anaphylactic shock is, histamine is produced in
The adrenal glands go crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a difference there. In fact, a lot of people that get many bees, the African bees, we see it a lot with.
Africanized bees, yes.
That people get multi-stings and they end up going to the hospital with anaphylactic shock. They're able to save them. Then 2 weeks later, they walk out of the hospital and drop dead because the adrenal glands have overreacted and they just can't function anymore.
Jay?
One thing I think, so far what I've heard in this conversation is we're putting a lot of attention on sort of the bad elements of bees.
Yeah.
And I think what I'd like to do is try and steer that back
Sure.
to more of the positive dimension of bees. And so you can see right here, I have in front of me, these are mason bee houses. And we made these. They're simply blocks of wood with a 7/16 drill bit drilled through. Mason bees or leafcutter bees are native. They're generally solitary. They don't form colonies like a honeybee does. And I have never seen bees like this be aggressive in any way. You put out your hand in front of them, they'll crawl on your finger and so on. What's amazing about these bees, probably more than any other, is they are voracious pollinators. And when we first, Mike was the one that taught me about them. I spent a whole winter making these boxes and put them out near our raspberries. And the first year, they'll find their way in. All you've got to do is hang them out somewhere. Because they occur naturally in the woods, they'll find their way into the hive. In any case, the first year, we hung these around our raspberry bushes, and we never had so many raspberries ever. So many that you just couldn't keep up with them. And as a result, we were letting some just die on the vine because you couldn't stay up with them. So for master gardeners, for farms, these are a great alternative. They are voracious pollinators. They reproduce at a pretty rapid rate as far as I can tell. And like I say, I've not seen a downside with these bees at all.
Now, that is truly a block of wood with just holes drilled. That's not hollow inside, so each bee goes into each hole.
Yep.
And that's where he or she, I guess.
So there's a different schools of thought on this. Sometimes people will use straws and they'll clean them out or they'll discard them at the end of the year. What we've found is that the bees actually will clean some of this out themselves. But you can see on this one, for example, they'll go in and they'll either cover it up with a little piece of mud or a leaf. They'll lay the larva in there. I think I calculated 19 days before they hatch out again, somewhere between.
Is there one egg or several, or?
There's several that come out, and then they just keep going. And so, right now, while this may only have just a few bees in it, by late June, this whole thing will be covered.
Wow.
And what I've always found interesting is, well, we have these hanging all over our place. And so when the roses are in bloom, the leafcutter bees will find rose petals. And sometimes this whole thing will be red because they've taken pieces of rose petal and they've covered it over. And so it's, as I say, they're native. They're amazing pollinators. And for any serious gardener that really wants to see some production out of their garden, mason bees are, or leafcutter bees. There's a few different varieties, but it's an amazing thing to see.
Wow.
And so one reason I was opposed to the bill, it said no beehives within 1,000 feet. Well, the reality is, as you look at this piece of wood, this is a beehive, and we've got them all over the place. So this would have affected the way we pollinate things at our place. And
Typically, how far does a bee travel in its?
2 square miles.
How many?
2 square miles.
2 square miles.
6,000 acres.
Wow. And they get.
These
they
don't
can
travel
find-
as
They
far.
can find their way back by, does anybody know how?
Well, they do it off the sun and the direction,
Okay.
and, they have their own.
They're better than bumblebees then.
Yeah, well, bumblebees will do this in the natural state too, but
I see.
they don't forage as far apart, and these guys don't forage as far apart.
And that's probably because they're indiscriminate pollinators.
Right. Well, bumblebees are indiscriminate. They're what we call generalist
Okay.
pollinators, the same as honeybees are generalists. And mason bees are more related to fruit trees, fruit crops, than they are to other vegetables. They like the watermelons or cantaloupes or something. They're not even in season. Like Jay said, these guys shut down in June, and then they go through their whole life cycle inside those tubes, and then they reproduce again the following year. Whereas honeybees, as you know, we put out brood and brood and brood all year long.
How do we protect hives in winters like we just had? I mean, Bill was mentioning that this was a pretty darn severe winter.
We still haven't figured it out yet.
Oh, okay.
We're
Well,
working on that.
that'll be for the next bee conference.
That's a process in a working progress right now.
We talked about the issue of, when I talked about this to Commissioner Comfort, he had indicated that in his neighborhood there was somebody has an in-ground pool. The kids are splashing around, water gets up on the deck. They go in to eat lunch, the sun hits it, chlorine disappears, whatever. And the next door neighbor has, I think, 6 hives. And of course, the bees are immediately attracted to the water because, like any living thing, they need water and they need to use it to produce the honeycombs and to live and to produce honey and so forth. You made some suggestions. The neighbor was asked to do something and they put dishes of water out. But there's something that they need to know further. Will you want to amplify that?
Well, I was just, if the dishes are shallow enough, they're fine. But when you get into having sufficient water out there, you need to put some type of gravel in there so the bees can stand on it without drowning. The other thing is the water has to be maintained as fresh. If it gets old, they're not as attracted to it. And especially when you're competing against a swimming pool, you definitely have to keep it fresh, which means maybe going out once a week and changing the water and adding new water to it. I was explaining to you that the lady in Annapolis, right on Market Street, that raises bees, she has a bird bath that's set up right next to her hive, right next to it, that the bees could go to for their water. Because bees, because of their union rules, we talked about this in class, they'll go to the best, closest source. And if the water's available to them 5 feet away rather than across the yard to the swimming pool, they'll go to the 5 feet. They don't necessarily have to go to the swimming pool.
So the solution would be a couple of bird baths in front of the
Doesn't need to
hive.
be in front,
Oh,
but
just-
in the direction of the
just-
pool.
I got you. Okay.
And you could use chicken, as I do, chicken waterers.
Yeah.
I put gravel in the channel around a chicken waterer, the bottom of a chicken waterer, and hang that up out in front of the hive. And the gravel, of course, gives the bee something to stand on. Then I periodically change the water.
Next big one, common sense solutions.
And Mark, I don't know what's in that article that Mike gave you, but one of the things that,
You got a copy of it.
oh, I'm sure I do.
Oh.
Anyway,
Didn't do his homework.
That's right. So, anyway, one of the things that we were taught in class when Mike taught us was, this responsible beekeeping and also locations about where you're going to put the hive and whatnot. And I mean, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine who lives up in Sudlersville called me a couple weeks ago and said, "Can you put 2 hives on my farm?" And I said, "Well, I'll meet you there on Sunday and we'll look around." So we went up there a couple Sundays ago, and I mean, one of my first questions was, "Where's the water source?" And so I didn't want to put bees there that weren't going to have water, and he assured me that this big thing of muck actually fills with water. And, it's like a little, what do you call those things, a rain garden sort of thing. And so, but that's part of being responsible, is making sure that they don't have to go into your neighbor's swimming pool.
One of the things that I just heard, which I hope Allison will talk about, but the other day we were talking about cucumbers. And when you were talking about how many times the flower needs to be visited,
Oh, yeah.
I didn't
learned
know that. I always had just assumed that pollination occurs with one visit and it's done. And I hope you'll talk about that a little bit,
Yeah,
because
I learned that, and I forget why or what I was reading, but to make one cucumber with one flower equals one cucumber. And that flower needs to be pollinated 20 times to make one cucumber. I was amazed by that, which is why the density of bees that we have is so important. It is, yeah. So it's not, like Jay said, not just one visit and then going along. They need multiple visits for each different piece of fruit that occurs.
To look at it from the other perspective, according to this National Geographic article, one ecologist has estimated that a pound of clover honey, 1 pound of honey, represents the food rewards from approximately 8.7 million flowers.
Wow.
8.7 million blossoms. That's a lot of visits for bees to make in order to make that pound of honey. And as Mike said, they're ranging over, the bees go where they want to go, wherever the hives are. The bees are going to forage over that 2-mile radius going to where the nectar sources are, nectar and pollen.
Where can the public get local honey? At farmers markets, I guess, and that sort of thing? Can we tell them where these are? Well, I have one down the road from me at Christ Church on Thursdays, but they're at Easton and around.
almost all the farmers markets, we go to the one in Chestertown. There's generally one beekeeper there throughout the season that sells honey. Sometimes there's 2.
Jay, what is the season?
Chestertown, I think now is year-round, but the primary season starts in like mid-March and will go almost up through Christmas. So it's a pretty long season. We sell honey when we have it. We try and just focus on lavender honey, which is kind of a narrow market, but that's what we focus on. But the Easton Farmers Market has a great beekeeper there. I'm drawing a blank on his name. Matt Redmond. He sells honey. I know for a time at the Kent Island market, there were at least 2 people there that were selling honey. So almost every farmer's market, I think,
Okay.
will have a beekeeper.
Commissioner Anderson, and let me just add, it's important to look for that local honey. I just did a presentation for the Wye River Beekeepers Association on the, the definition, proposed definition of honey at the FDA. FDA has now proposed to define honey after, I think it's taken them 8 years to get work up to the definition. Several years ago, the Maryland legislature passed the Maryland Honey Purity Law, which contains a definition, now contains a definition of honey. And that was in reaction to food safety surveys that had found that an astonishing percentage of the honey found on shelves at large supermarket chains contained a substantial portion, up to 49% of high fructose corn syrup instead of honey. Another test found that 100% of the honey, supposed honey that was sold at drugstores, and particularly drugstore chains like CVS or Walgreens or Eckerd's, the 100% of the honey had absolutely no pollen in it. And natural honey is going to contain some pollen. I mean, we filter it, but some of the pollen comes through, and that's part of the health benefit of the honey anyway.
And it's not the health benefit by taking these small amounts of pollen. You do something to reduce the seriousness of hay fever. I mean, is that any method to that thinking?
Yeah, I don't know if where the proof is and all that. I know there's lots of anecdotal evidence that if you eat local honey, then you have less trouble with allergens and allergic problems that are in your environment. So, you know, the scientist in me says I can't answer your question, but yeah, people tell me that all the time.
It won't hurt.
Our vet has us give our dog honey. It seems like to me a waste of perfectly good honey, but he tells us to give the dog a teaspoon of honey a day because our dog has allergies, and this is meant to desensitize the dog from the pollen.
Help your local beekeeper. Buy local honey.
Exactly.
Bill, did it help?
Yes, it does help.
Oh, good.
It does help.
The really important part, I think, apart from the pollination, and one reason I'm glad the bill is no longer, is when I think of people like Matt Redmond and Mike and others who sell honey, honey sales in the region, I don't know that anybody's actually put a dollar number on it, but it's got to be substantial.
Well, when I started 30 years ago, a pound of honey was costing $2. And now we're getting up to between $6 and $9 for a pound of honey. So the value of it has increased. I mean, I don't know if we're making any more honey than we were 30 years ago, but the value has increased. The public attention to it has really pushed the price up.
And maybe this helps, that because we're coming into the season where your bees will be working very hard. And what is this idea that a new hive configuration where instead of opening the thing up and doing all this and that, you turn a spigot on and all this honey comes rolling out? Is that a myth or what? I mean, I keep hearing about this.
Well, it's a myth. The guy's made $49 million on it.
Beware, beehive keepers. This is, it doesn't work?
I don't know if it works or not. I'd have to actually see it in action to be able to give an answer. Because one of the issues I have right away is how do they keep all the detritus, the wax cappings, or the bee's knees, or the wood chips that we have to filter out to make our honey clean and acceptable to the public. How are they doing it when they're just tapping it off on a box like that? That's so that they have to show me.
One thing that occurs to me before I forget, and I'm over 70, and it's likely I will, but I wrote it. But if Jay can collect relevant emails, if you wish to have them posted, what I'd like to do is to get in the hands of our people at emergency services, the volunteer fire departments, and so forth, just an update. If they're called, there's a swarm, who to call, that somebody can go out and collect this valuable insect life and move it to a place where it can do some good. I can just see somebody going down to the local hardware store and taking a spray and spraying these critters, and what a
Happens.
waste. And I'm sure that happens.
It does happen.
And it shouldn't.
Yeah.
You know, because there are people that will be more than happy to safely remove them for a good, productive purpose.
Yeah.
Not only that, but one thing that I've learned about the beekeeping community is, one, it's a tight-knit group. And
That's for sure.
anytime that I've ever called, anytime that.
And believe me when I say this, I am so glad we're doing this. I love new information, and I'm getting filled with it. You know, by the way, you see this, Bill? This is what I, you could, there.
But what I was going to say was, every beekeeper that I've ever been in contact with, if you have a question or you have an issue with your bees, somebody out there within the community, within the beekeeping community, will be more than happy to help. And so when you were raising the question about safety, I would imagine if there was a neighbor who was being difficult, or if they had difficulty moving their hives from one part of their property to another, that all they'd have to do is ask the association for help.
Yeah.
And you'd have a half a dozen beekeepers step up and say, I'll be happy to help. Or I'll be happy to come out and get a swarm, or whatever the case is.
Look at the room.
Yeah.
I mean, people have even come to learn about things. Of course, the people in the audience probably know more than I do, but I know more than I did before I walked in the room. I now know a lot. So this is a good thing. We need to get this information out so that, you know, people need not be unreasonably afraid of something that does so much good.
In preparation for this meeting, I was actually at a farm meeting last week at the Baltimore Museum of Art. There was a Future Harvest meeting, and they were having an award ceremony. But anyway, I talked to a beekeeper from Baltimore City. She actually has bees 2 blocks over from the Baltimore Museum of Art. So,
Yeah.
knowing that I was coming here, I really wanted to know, wow, that's kind of close proximity. Does anybody, you know, what do you run into for issues? And she said, none at all. People are so excited. There's no, I don't know if in that area they've done a better job educating people. But I feel like, you know, our area is very large compared to what a city block would be, and how well received the bees are on a city block. So it might behoove, you know, folks who are interested to do some research on urban bees and see how people deal in that close proximity with their urban beekeepers.
And there are bees at the White House,
Yeah.
on the south lawn of the White House.
Hives.
Yeah, hives, yeah.
Beehives.
Wow.
And within the last few years, the cities of New York and Washington, D.C. have passed laws or repealed prohibitions and passed laws that specifically allowed beekeeping.
I see.
And Montgomery County in Maryland rewrote its zoning code to allow beekeeping in all zones within the county without restriction.
Well, it's obvious it can be done safely.
The University of Maryland had their beehives between the dorms and the class area. Are they still there?
Well, they moved to a new
By the
location,
stadium?
but it's the same situation.
Okay. But this was right by the stadium. Every morning, every night, the students would be passing right through the flyaway of these bees. Never heard of any problem with
So
it.
were the football people when they came to the games. They were going through them, and no problem.
Fast as 66.
And you passed right by those
With all
bees.
full disclosure.
We had the apiary building right up behind the stadium there for years and years.
One of the things that I've always found funny about beekeepers, and I'm sure all these guys can tell their own stories, but to illustrate just how helpful I think most beekeepers will be in going to get a swarm or a hive that's no longer needed, I can tell you I have driven over 100 miles to go get a hive that I knew was eventually going to be destroyed. It was in part of a church, and it was in a church column, and we removed the whole entire column. I sealed it off on both ends and put it in a trailer to bring it home. And if you've talked to other people, they'll say, oh, that's nothing. I've driven 200 miles to go get a swarm. And
In the snow.
yeah, in the,
I got a story that tops that. I had a bill and survived its end.
But how far have you gone, Mike, to go get a swarm?
I'm lazy. I've maybe stayed within the Eastern Shore region for bees. But I wanted to bring up that I have a friend that's a beekeeper, and he does a lot of building calls. And he actually did in Centerville here, the Blue Moon Inn, their wall had bees inside the wall, and he removed those bees from there. And he took the honey from the hive and made mead with it, which was pretty tasty.
An idea that occurs to me is that we probably should, and I'll get this done, we'll get it to our community affairs people, but send some informative bulletin to all the pest control companies to alert them that, you know, if there's a swarm inside or outside a house, there are capable people perfectly willing to come out and effectively remove that swarm and, you know, make a call, contact someone from this list. Now,
That's good.
And I'll say it happens pretty quickly. I know at the Extension office last summer, I had at least 5, 6 calls of people wanting to get rid of their swarms. And I remember there were twice where beekeepers had already heard within the community that this was going on, and they beat me to finding someone on the list. So we have a list in our Extension office. Anybody can call at any time. And if I'm not there in the office, other faculty are there to
but I think
pass along.
we'll send a note to, you know, and I'm going to meet with the Chamber of Commerce tomorrow and, you know, see, you know, the members there in the county, get their addresses and so forth, and just send out, you know, hey, if this exists, contact someone from this list so that they can be safely removed, because the bee populations are under some stress, and if we have one, we want to save it.
That'd be great.
Yeah?
Terrific.
We can do that.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful. Plus, it has to happen pretty quick.
Yeah, well, I guess they dissipate.
Yeah, they'll go away again.
Yeah, swarm season only lasts so long. And it usually by 1st of May, when black locust blooms, swarm season stops or ceases. Then you get a little bit sporadic during the rest of the year, but the big major portion of it is now. As soon as dandelions bloom,
Okay.
swarm season starts.
That's the key.
Yeah, that's the key.
Well, anybody have anything more to add? Yeah.
Mark, I don't know how much, I mean, I don't understand the county government very well, but I don't know how much.
I'm learning.
Yeah, the commissioners affect what happens at the school board, but it would be nice if there was some fallout from this that could encourage the school board to have some kind of a few minutes or a few hours of bee keeping knowledge, or not beekeeping, but just the benefits of bees, so that the discussion can happen in elementary schools or at middle schools. And then, you know, kids tend to bring things home, and then there's a discussion at home then. And so it'd be great if that was a small part of.
You know, Tom, that's a great point. Just today, because today is Earth Day, I spent the entire day giving a bee presentation to all of the second graders at Sothersville Elementary School, and I'm pretty washed out because of it. But I will tell you that teaching kids about the importance of bees at a young age
It's vital.
it really, you could just see they had a whole new appreciation. Rather than stomping on a honeybee on a dandelion, they now understand that without bees, 75% of our food is gone, all the fruits and vegetables. And when that's described to a second grader, it really does open their eyes. I look forward to it. I've done it now for the past 3 years. I look forward to it every year. But I think that's a vital thing to get this into the
I've taken it even
schools.
further than second grade. I've taken it to pre-K and kindergarten classes. For 16 years, I've been doing this with Chapel District School in Talbot County.
This is because of relationships you have
With the
created
teachers.
within the schools.
Right.
So what we need to do is to try to expand that to across the board possibly in
Right.
That would be
elementary
great.
school.
And I bet, Mark, that you could get volunteers from Bill and from Mike and from everybody
Sure.
to help with that if, you know, this schools wanted somebody to come talk about bees.
Absolutely.
I think there's a whole bunch of beekeepers that love to talk. That's
It's a
why
lot
we're
of
here.
fun. It's a lot of fun.
As evidence,
Yeah, right, exactly.
Does anybody out in the audience want to say anything or ask a question?
I'm just happy for the turnaround.
Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah.
So I would appreciate your idea of providing more information to the pesticide applicators, and you might want to also consider like where the homeowners can buy pesticides. You know, some of the retail outlets that sell pesticides, like let those people know if someone comes in and wants to spray bees, that they maybe have a pamphlet they can hand over.
Well, I'm not so sure we want to suggest in the same breath where to buy pesticides when we want to get beekeepers to remove
you know, some
them.
of the retail outlets, like the hardware stores or whatever, where somebody might go in and want to buy a can of Raid or something, or wasp killer, because they want to kill the bees.
I think what Carol's saying is if somebody goes to a hardware store and says,
they work
I've got
at
a bee
hardware
swarm and I want to get rid of it, that the store owner says, before you do that, here's a list of beekeepers that can help you.
By the way, my colleague, Robert Buckey, has come with us, Commissioner Buckey, and has an interest in this activity as well. He doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to ask him to help me distribute some of the information we've talked about to fellow pest control companies. So one of the things that came up, you do this, we want to make sure others do. When they see a swarm, you know, and they call a pest control company, a lot of the pest control companies call beekeepers and they grab them and take them away. We're trying to get enough education out there that if a pest control company is called, they have a list of people in a beekeeper outfit.
They do.
Yeah.
It's actually an agricultural requirement that you cannot kill as first response when you come up on a beehive, whether it be a building, a school, whatever. Your first approach needs to be to try to contact the beekeeper, remove it, so forth. Then if that's not viable, then of course the pest control company has the power to spray a pesticide. But I can tell you 99% of the pest control companies on the Eastern Shore don't do that. They prefer to contact the beekeeper first.
Believe it or not, in Queen Anne's County, as we discovered, the animal control ordinance that's in effect under the rules, what did we say, 9-19, nuisance animals specifically excluded are honeybees. So it would, to destroy honeybees because they represent a nuisance is actually a violation of our law.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why so many pesticides today are that are labeled for exterior treatment. Not every pesticide that's used is labeled indoor and exterior. She was talking about Raid, that's an organophosphate, so it, that's a product that when you spray it, the LD50 is very low, so when you spray it, you got to be careful of the droplets, and the droplets spread, and as they spread, they get on plants and trees where bumblebees land and bees, and that's what kills the colonies off. That's what they're controlling. If that answers your question.
Yeah. We have here's a question. Mike Davis.
It sounds like a lot of us, like I know you mentioned this, the first class you taught, responsible beekeeping. Let's say on the opposite end of that, there's someone that is a beekeeper that isn't maintaining it properly or isn't responsible. What, as a neighbor, where does the proper steps that someone should take to hold someone accountable for something like that, unresponsible beekeeping?
Good question.
Good question. I haven't run into an irresponsible beekeeper yet.
But if that were to come up,
Well-
what is the protocol for something like that? Like if a person owns a dog.
Well, it's peer pressure, it would be, I could see where, his discussions with other beekeepers would enlighten him.
But as a neighbor, the neighbor can't force someone to get rid of their bees. Is there someone that they should reach out to?
Beekeepers,
just-
yeah. They would call the White River Bee Association. And they're the ones who would approach this.
Most beekeepers, as I was mentioning earlier, like, I know, yeah, it's a tight group. I mean, there's a list at the extension office of all the beekeepers, and I'm confident that any one of us here, you look at that list and you're going to know most of the people on there. And as Mike says, all of them have to be registered in some way, shape, or form. And so most of them, because they have to register, are going to follow what I think are
Basic guidelines.
Yeah, basic guidelines, and they're not going to deliberately sort of cross the line.
Plus, on top of that, maintaining bees is not, having bees, you can't just like let them go and forget about it. I mean, I wish it was that easy, but if you do that for a season or two, then you have some empty white boxes in your backyard. You won't have any bees. So I think it's kind of hard to be a completely negligent beekeeper because the bees will go away. So.
Too many diseases, too many pests, varroa mite, other things that will take out those bees if they're not being taken care of. It was one of the nice things about having native honeybees, wild bees, is that the genetics are there to make a more resistant bee. And if, by destroying these swarms coming off these native, the wild bee populations, we're actually losing the potential for solving one of the major problems of beekeeping for the last 20, 30 years, and that's the varroa mite. You know, so we need these populations. We need them badly.
The records of honey beekeeping in this county virtually since its founding in the 17th century. Honeybees pollinate peaches, apples, cherries, melons, pumpkins, cucumbers we heard about, and other crops.
Raspberries.
Such as, yes.
Lavender.
Sunflowers. Other fruits and vegetables are dependent on sunflowers. They also have become an important part of the county's ecosystem with respect to flowers, flowering trees and shrubs and other plants in the county. So we hope that beekeeping will continue to be an important part of the agricultural culture here in Queen Anne's County for a long time to come.
About wheat and corn and these feedstock, how do they get pollinated?
They're all pretty much wind-driven
Self-pollinated.
or self-pollinated. Soybeans used to make honey, but they've now made the flowers so insignificant that bees have a hard time getting anything out of a soybean plant. So basically, by growing a lot of corn or a lot of soybeans, we're artificially setting up what we call bee deserts, where there's nothing to eat. This is why it was so important for us to maintain hedgerows, or now in the put-aside acreage, we're allowed now to put wildflower pastures in so that bees have other resources for feed at times of the year when we actually have a dearth of flowers in Queen Anne's County and the Eastern Shore. Usually in July and August, bees are starving, you know, and we have to go in and actually put more sugar on bees than we would normally, because if we don't, then they're not going to be able to build up in the fall to survive the winter. So it's a critical thing for these bee pastures to be developed. We're developing one at the Y Research Center. We've run it now for over 3 years. We just renovated it this year. I just put one in down on the lower shore at the Pemberton Colonial Farm. And we're looking at maybe starting some other bee meadows. These are the same things we used to see along the highways, these highway flower patches that used to, everybody used to, oh, what a nice thing to see. But now, because of budget cuts or whatever, they're not being maintained, and so they're kind of falling to the side. But, you know, it's very important nutritionally for the bee to be healthy, to have some of these bee pastures out there for them to utilize.
Oh, an unhealthy bee is susceptible to these mites and bunches
Prevent
of
the
other
mites from
diseases
being-
and things of that sort.
That's right.
Can I get back to your question again? Because I know that people will want to know what recourse they have if, you know, they feel like the bees are not being taken care of properly. But I don't think this is really the function of the state beekeeping inspector guys that go out. But the state has a inspector that goes out and checks on beehives. They're really looking for diseased beehives so that we can destroy them so they won't spread the diseases around. But when I got a call, I don't remember the guy's name, the guy who does around.
Burroughs.
Yeah, Dean, when he went to my house one day, and I don't exactly know how he knew how to get a hold of me, but he called me, and he said, Tom, I'm at your hives, and everything was okay. He said, and then he said to me, you know, this is really nice here. He said, there's a really nice water source. The bees are really close to the water. I think you're good. And he went on and on. So I know that he's into watching for all those things. So I suppose, even though that's not really their function, if there was a concerned citizen, they could call the dean or who's ever doing his job, the state bee inspector, and say, listen, I think there might be a problem here, you know?
Well, we're fortunate because of the budget, they actually cut out the apiary inspection
Yeah, I saw
this
that.
year, but it's been reinstated now, but they don't have the budget that they would had normally.
Yeah, it's shaky,
So, any support we can throw towards having apiary inspections would be beneficial. You know, we're already donating money as beekeepers on the side to keep the apiary program, inspection program going. But they definitely are on that edge of the iceberg where it's going to fall into the sea.
I'll tell you what my concern is. This Termidor, as I said before, I think it was you were at the meeting I talked. Termidor is the #1 pesticide out there right now that's killing the honeybee. It's because of the misapplicator. The applicator goes out to the house, he sprays for ants, he does this, he's spraying, it's windy, whatever, and
Drift.
one drop of that product will kill an entire colony. Once that bee comes in contact with just one parchment of that
Wow.
Termidor, it's dead. I mean, Termidor is a fantastic insecticide. It's only supposed to be labeled for termites and ants, but unfortunately, there are companies that do things illegally.
Do you know the chemical name? Is it fipronil?
No, it's not Fipronil. Termidor is, I don't use the product, so Termidor is, I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Okay?
'cause-
So to be sitting here thinking
Yeah.
it's all the pesticides, the active ingredients are in my head, but I don't use the product, but I can
Right.
certainly get it real quick for you. But that's my concern. I wish there was a way we as a county could find a way to do that, but that's really the Department of Agriculture would set
Yeah, we
the
don't wanna go
guidelines. Yeah.
So the big deal is improperly used pesticides.
Absolutely. I think that's where the education as well goes, is the homeowners spraying pesticides at their house. They don't realize that flower that's sitting there. They don't realize the plants that are around that bee lands on. And when that bee lands on it, carries it back to the colony, you know, he's moving around the colony, he's spreading it out. But sooner or later, it's going to get to the queen, and when she's dead,
Yeah, that's it.
that's it, you know, and that's what happens.
Fipronil?
That's it. No, you're thinking of, no. Fipronil is, it's not Fipronil. Look it up online.
I just did.
Oh, you did? You got an internet there? Pronounce, how you spelling it?
Fipronil fluorocyanobenzoyl.
Benzopyrazole, that's exactly what it is, yeah.
Pyro, yeah.
Yeah, it's a, so that, what that is, it's a microencapsulated, that means it's microencapsulated. So it's a time-release insecticide, that's exactly what that means. And it's like an organism in the sense that it only takes one droplet of that to get into the system. It doesn't kill the bee fast. It kills
Slow
them
down.
slow. That's what causes the problem. So people that have farms just, you know, maybe that's something you might want to talk about to the citizens, is be careful with the pesticide usage.
Well, when you go into Lowe's and over 70% of the chemicals that are available for a homeowner to use in the yard are neonics.
Yeah.
And the fact is that homeowners are using more neonics than farmers. It's a dangerous situation out there that our bees are having to live with.
Yeah, there's a lot of education that has to happen.
Yeah.
There's no real safe pesticide for bees
Right.
to use in conjunction when you're treating for other insects. There really isn't. Bee is so receptive to pesticides.
Oh, yeah. We try to, well, in the bee class, we teach the IPM programs
Okay, good.
for beekeeping, you know, because, you know, for a while there, through the 80s and 90s, we only had two choices. It was Apistan, which is fluvalinate, or Coumaphos, which is another OP. And that we found out very rapidly that one, the fluvalinate there was resistance to from the mite. And Coumaphos was causing problems with our queens and drones, sterilization. You know, but those were the only two choices. So we had to come up.
Wasn't that an IGR too?
No,
It wasn't an IGR?
I don't think
If
so.
it causes sterilization, it has to be an IGR.
Okay, well, it has to be, but I think it was the chemical itself that was called,
Okay.
it was like chemical sterilization
Right.
that was going on. So we had to develop an IPM program for beekeeping, you know, and starting with, you know, and it has to start with management, our bee management, and then we could build up to cultural techniques we could use, and we moved up. Now, it's recommended, and Dean, when he teaches the IPM course, he always says the hard chemicals like the chemicals now are the last resort, because there's a lot of other materials that have come up that are just as good. Menthol, we're using Apibar Life, we're using other, we call them soft chemicals, formic acid, oxalic acid. All these materials that are used, and a lot of them that are more, they're organic, so they could be used in organic beekeeping also. But that is something that's just developed over the last 10 years, more or less, that this IPM program of beekeeping.
There's a lot of good organic insecticides out there for beekeepers.
Mike, I'd like to get your opinion and Commissioner Buckey's opinion about the effect of mosquito spraying. You know, because there's a lot of neighborhoods that want to have their neighborhood sprayed for mosquitoes, and, you know, I don't want my yard sprayed for mosquitoes. I'd rather live with the mosquitoes.
Well, I don't know, you probably know more
It's
about
horrible. It's horrible. You know, my company practices IPM. That's all we do is integrated pest management. So when you start talking about throwing pesticides out there,
it indiscriminately.
exactly, and that's what you're going. When you're spraying for mosquitoes, that's exactly what you're doing. That product is going out and it is just covering. It's a fog, and so it's covering the plants, the trees, the house. It's covering the cars. It's covering everything. Everywhere the bees and other insects land that do not need to die and be put through this type of fogging that we, the county, do and the state does. No, I disagree with it.
So does it kill honeybees? Like when you spray for mosquitoes, is it killing?
Absolutely, it will. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've seen colonies drop from the sky where they've done a fog, and the bees will sense. The bees have senses. They'll sense that, you know, they'll sense the insecticide that's in the air. They sense that stuff. And they're like a swarm. It looks like a basketball. You guys all seen it. It'd be sitting on the side of a tree, and all of a sudden it just shifts. It moves. That's a bee. That's a honeybee swarm. That's in the natural, as you know. Well, the fogger comes by, and the bee senses it. Boom! It goes by. It goes right into the cloud and just drops. You know, and that's sad. It really is sad.
Yeah.
So.
I'm a little biased because I used to work for mosquito control when I was in college.
Well, you got over it. You recovered.
Back then, we were using mineral oil, MLO.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a much better material than what they're using now. Because I think now they use malathion.
Malathion, exactly. Malathion, man, is
But the thing is, and I think Marty, you were talking about this.
bad.
The sprayer comes by every Tuesday for you. So what would be the simplest result, best operating situation for the beekeeper? What would it be?
Maybe to cover the hives?
You know it's coming Tuesday, so close your hive up. You know, and then let it go past, and then you can do it. I mean, there are people that don't want any spray, you know, and you know, you can't avoid those people. But these people that say, all right, you're going through a neighborhood, and you come up to a no spray sign. You turn off the sprayer, you drive the 100 feet across their lot, and you turn the sprayer back on. It doesn't matter because you got drift. You have drift everywhere.
And malathion is more of a contact killer, so it only has a very
Short
small
life.
residual effect to
Right.
it. So the residual to it, it's not that long. Fluorescent light, which is the natural sun, it breaks that product down extremely fast. Like diazepam, diazepam, these type of natural insecticides that you're getting at the stores or the active ingredient. The fluorescent lights break it down very fast. So people who worry about the residual effect, Terminor again, the residual effect is forever. So that's how bad that product is. So
Sounds like this century's Chlorodan.
absolutely, Mark, absolutely it is.
Folks, we're, you know, almost 90 minutes into it. If you want to continue, we can, or we can wrap it up.
Thanks for doing this. I think
Thank
it's
you
been
very much.
helpful.
Yeah, a lot of
I'm glad
good
it's-
came
I want to thank my commissioner buddy
Yeah.
for coming in to
I'm sorry
add,
I'm late.
oh, no,
Jay.
the technical aspects of this were certainly beyond my pay grade, and that's his business, and he knows his stuff.
Yeah. I'm glad you put it on TV. I hope the public got some benefit out of it. So thanks for withdrawing the bill. Thanks for hosting the meeting. I think it's been great.
Well, and it also shows that those that are beekeepers are a tight-knit group, are knowledgeable, and this has been fun.
And please let us know if we can help you provide information for your other colleagues, fellow commissioners here, or if there's any,
Sure.
we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do.
Did
I
you guys
really,
come up with any solutions?
It really, it became
the
obvious.
bill's- the bill is dead.
Yeah, other than that,
There's the bill.
there you go.
I think one of the things we came up with that
Thanks
needs to
for
be
coming,
further-
guys.
further explored is education.
Absolutely.
Right.
The education, whether as a pesticide operator or as a student at a kindergarten class, is the more, there needs to be more involvement with kids or with other people, with beekeepers, so that this stuff can be.
Yeah, both Jay and Mike have arrangements with local elementary schools, and they have been providing for years beekeeping, bee information and so forth. The suggestion was to try to get Dr. Williamson of a mindset to allow beekeepers to come in to all the elementary schools once a year.
Okay, you want me to?
Yeah.
that'd be great.
I'm the liaison.
Yeah, and that's why I bring it up, so you know.
Monday, I have to sit down with her Monday, as a matter of fact.
That'd be great.
Oh, Jay, you send me an email, so, okay, refresh me and remind me, and I'll have one on in my head, so I don't forget, and I'll send it to her, and we'll set up something that.
And I think we have a lot of people through Bill and Mike that would be, I mean, we have a lot of resources out there that could help, so it's not gonna be, onerous for you just to go out to every second grade, or whatever.
Oh, well, believe me, after today, I'm not doing it.
I wonder if the county should look at its mosquito control more.
Yes.
I wonder if we should.
I
really
think
look
so.
at that and see, is it really working? And as you guys know, there is IPM methods homeowners can do to prevent some mosquitoes.
Right.
I do it at my house.
Yeah.
With chlorine pellets, so
Right.
anybody else can do the same thing.
Can I make a suggestion on that? Because I have read about this, not recently, and I don't have any true facts on it, I've only read about it. But it seems to me that there was a county in Washington State, or maybe it was Oregon, that had a mosquito problem. And they calculated that they were spending some hundreds of thousands of dollars per year on mosquito control. And what they did instead was they bought martin houses.
All right, purple martin.
And other
Good for honeybees.
swallow, insect-eating
Right.
bird houses.
Hang on, wait a minute. Purple martins love honeybees.
I know, but hold on, let me finish. What they did
They're
was
relative to the bee eaters in Africa.
Yes.
what they did was they set these houses around breeding areas of mosquitoes, swampy areas, that sort of thing. And it ended up having a major impact on mosquito control, and the county itself ended up saving a lot of money. And so it was a natural pest control that ended up working for everyone. So,
Fairfax County, Virginia does exactly that,
Okay.
okay, good.
so, and it works.
When I was in grad school, I was a mosquito control person for the city of Bowie one summer.
Both of you
Oh,
guys.
really?
And I sprayed nothing. I walked around with my little bait and
Absolutely.
threw a larvicide into all the ponds and everything else, and put myself out in the evenings, 2 nights a
Landing
week.
counts.
As a bait,
Yeah,
as a
landing
bait
counts.
boy.
You don't realize it, like sulfur, products like
It
that
worked.
work excellent on mosquitoes.
Mark, I think a lot of goods, I was really upset a week and a half ago, but it's funny how things can turn around, because I think a lot of good's coming out of this dead bill, but I think some positive things are coming out of it, and I really appreciate you having this meeting.
I would like to have thought that I had it all in my head and how it would end at the very beginning, but I'm really not.
You know, if I could speak to that, it's a shame that Commissioner Anderson has gotten the beat that he's gotten on this bee thing, to be honest with you. I think his intentions on the bill, because there's another issue out there, but this was Commissioner Anderson's bill. He had his reasons for it, and I think his reasons were legitimate, but again, this was probably the better way to go with it, absolutely. But also, to have him tore up the way it was tore up, I just think was horrible by yourself and other people. Just jump on the internet and automatically just assume something that, you know what I mean? So before, I'm saying this in a nice way, so before we assume something, why don't we contact, like Jay Falstead? You called me at 6 o'clock in the morning, I think it was. So, so does several hundred other people, or not hundred, but several other people. But again, I just think that Commissioner Anderson doesn't deserve the criticism he's getting on this bee bill, because I think what he did was for his own personal reasons. I don't know the situation why he did it. I never asked him, and he knows that, nor do I care, because I would never support this, but I don't think it's fair. I think that, you know,
All is well that ends well.
all is well as it ends. I just wanted to
Well,
say
that
that.
ends well.
But that's what I feel like some positive things came out of it, even though it might have gotten a little ugly for a few days.
It's all good. He's a big
Well,
man.
Yeah.
one of the sad parts about that piece was that the quotes that were picked up were by, for the most part, people that had no idea what bees were all about. They were just political operatives functioning on the sideline. Some were beekeepers mixed in, and I think it detracted from the good advice and ideas that were coming forth from Jay and Tom and other folks. But all's well that ends well.
Yeah, I'm good.
This has been very good, so
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks a lot.
And
Thank
you.
this is the right way to do it. This is local government in action here.
Yeah.
Good.
And I learned something about cucumbers. And many other
It takes
things.
12 visits to make an apple.
How many?
12 visits.
Wonderful.
So I got an important question though. So I have a neighbor that has a beehive.
Okay.
Okay? And no, he didn't do this for me. Then my neighbor can't afford to move the bee nest. You and I talked about this briefly. They can't afford to move it. So since we're talking about it, what is the suggestion if there's, you know, Mark's neighbor, whoever, Jay's, yours, somebody, my neighbor, somebody that can't afford to move it, you know?
Well, they physically, I don't know what you mean
Yeah,
by
they just
afford.
don't-
They're
money-wise.
physically, they can't
Well,
pick
money
it up.
physically, they just don't have the money to move the bees. And I volunteered.
Is it in their house or something?
No,
Like,
it's outside. They got it in stakes though. They're permanently in the ground and so forth. So I said, when I come to this meeting today, I'll get someone's number and maybe.
Yeah.
So this is an art, I mean, I live in your neighborhood, so,
It's
yeah.
next door to me. The house next to me.
And did they want the beehive moved?
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
so
maybe
they
we should
should-
talk about
Do they
it.
want to keep the beehive but move it?
I don't know. You can talk to them.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think. they want the bees.
Otherwise, you want to talk to him
I was
at
gonna
the
say,
Y
yeah.
River Association.
somebody at Y River will.
Somebody would
probably
love to
help a
have
lot.
those bees.
They're all gonna follow you home now and dig.
You're gonna
It's
have
a swarm,
You're
it's a
gonna
swarm.
have this
Trust me, they'll
beekeeper fight in your front yard because everybody's going to be fighting over these bees.
Right.
Well, at this point, you know, motion to adjourn, and
Yes.
all in favor? Aye. Super.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Mark.
million. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.